Ora siamo veramente pronti. Alright, 3, 2, 1.
Hello everyone, I'm Allie. Welcome to my channel. I'm so excited to be here today for the first ever episode of A Room of My Own. Alright, so today's episode is going to be about one of the most famous Italian poets, Giacomo Leopardi, or Leopardi if we have to go full American. So, Leopardi was a very famous Italian 19th century poet. But I would say he's a sad girly pop. Truly, if you read his poetry, his spirit, he might have lived in the 19th century, but he was more Tumblr 2014 or TikTok 2025 coded. I swear. Like, he embodied the sad girl aesthetic. So, why are we talking about Leopardi today? Well, I'm going to get there in 1 second, but first, you need a brief summary of Leopardi's life to understand why this guy was so sad, truly. Like, people know him for his cosmic pessimism. So basically, Leopardi was born in Recanati, which is a place in Italy. And he was born in a very wealthy family. And his father really wished for him to study. So he spent most of his youth studying ancient Greek and Latin, translating from Virgil to any other ancient author you might think of. And in his writings, Leopardi sort of talks about how he regrets spending most of his youth studying. And also, he spent most of his youth hunched on a desk. That's why he got a deformity on his back and a deformity on the front. So, at a certain period of his life, he became really ugly. He says it in his writings, not me. He talks about being malformed and how that just sort of contributed to him being more sad. And also, to add up to that, his father didn't want him to go out of Recanati, which was a real problem because Leopardi wanted to go out. When he eventually was allowed to go out, he went to Rome and with a friend of his, was wildly disappointed, and he fell in love for the first time. Guess what? The guy got rejected. Seriously, he got rejected. First heartbreak ever. You can imagine the poems he wrote after that. And then he fell in love with another woman. Fun fact, his best friend, whom he traveled with everywhere, was the love interest of the woman he fell in love with. So he felt rejected and very sad because his best friend sort of, conquered or fell in love with the woman he loved. So Leopardi was sad. And that's how his pessimistic approach was born. But not just that, truly. He was a sad man in general. It's okay. And we can find his thoughts on the condition of man and how unhappiness is sort of like the state of everyone and how happiness is basically impossible in this thing called Lo Zibaldone dei Pensieri. The Zibaldone was a huge ass notebook he brought with him everywhere he went. You might find anything on that. His thoughts, what he ate, I don't know, his poems, anything. His works, his words, everything is written on that, okay? You can buy it. It's actually for sale, and it was published after he died, okay? So we can see in Zibaldone dei Pensieri and in his works that there is sort of a journey with his poetry, right? So we have a very hopeful poetry in the beginning, even if life sucks and everything sucks and I hate life and, I'm depressed. There's hope in the first early years, okay? And the atmosphere is really naturalistic, I would say. He uses very natural images, sort of dreamish as well. And then there's a pause. He stops writing poetry, and then he goes on and moves on to philosophical poetry. So why did Leopardi stop writing for a period of time? Poetry. Well, this is what we're addressing today, and this is what you're learning today with me. So basically, Leopardi wrote when he was 16 this essay called On the Popular Errors of the Ancients. I looked down because here is my little notebook with everything. So, On the Popular Errors of the Ancient sort of wants to criticize our ancestors and be like, us modern people, we're so cool. Because we have had an epistemologic revolution epistemological revolution that has led us to change our beliefs, and now we know the truth because yay science, because yay rationality. You guys told yourselves stories, but we're the best. Only that, when he writes that and he criticizes the errors of the ancient, telling them, you guys wrote stories on basically anything. You had stories on why the moon existed and why the sun rose the way it rose. Leopardi realizes that time and the ancients were far happier than us because they could tell themselves stories. So what does poetry have to do with this? Poetry is a language of beauty, and it is used to convey beauty. And the ancients, our ancestors, could use poetry to their advantage because they saw beauty in the world. But Leopardi realizes that after this epistemological revolution, after the scientific revolution, there's no more beauty in the world. Everything is sad, all right? That's what he says. So poetry becomes a desperate fail to capture a bit of illusion and poetry. So the first point of non-return, so the first point where Leopardi sort of separates himself from everything else, from the hopeful poetry, is this poem called L'Infinito, where he says, and to flounder in the sea is sweet to me. So even desperate actions and desperate things such as being cast away and never returning are hopeful, are sweet, There's hope. And in that poem, what is important to know is that Leopardi is trying to admire the view, but there's this bush, and he cannot see the view with this bush present. So he does not move. He sits in front of the bush, stares at it, and with his mind travels to a far place. So here, Leopardi introduces us to the problem of the condition of men, because men are infinite, so they can generate the infinite even while being present in that moment and being sort of finished. All right? So that's the first point. And then Leopardi loses all his hope and says, there's no more beauty in the world. There's no reason for me to write poetry. And that's where he writes what are known as le operette morali, which are all written using prose. So while poetry is a language of beauty, prose becomes the language of facts and reality. So Leopardi interrogates himself on the condition of man, on happiness, unhappiness, truly just about anything, creating these characters that are talking to each other in le operette morali. So this is what happens. He stops and he starts writing prose. But then there's a passage where he says, you know what, maybe poetry can do both, can talk about facts and reality while also inserting beauty. So realizing that sadness is present does not delete beauty, does not ultimately exclude it, And that's where the revolution happens. And we can see it in a poem called On a Lovely Lady's Image Carved in Her Tomb. So this is where we truly see Leopardi's philosophy becoming poetry. And this is so peculiar of this author because the message he wants to convey, it's not just, I'm telling you a poem, it's beautiful, like in the early years, where he says, oh, I'm staring at this bush, and I had the infinite in my mind. How cool are humans? Life sucks. He's not doing that only. He's telling you, you know what? This is so cool. Life has this beautiful aspect to it, but also we're so little. We don't matter what happens to us after we die. So it becomes philosophical. And I'm going to read two passages to show how poetry sort of remains. So it's still the language of beauty. And then the second passage of the same poem is used to express this philosophical aspect and a reflection of human nature. Also, if you want to know how to distinguish from poetry and philosophical poetry in Leopardi, the thing you have to look for is questions. Because after the operette morali, which is that moment when he stopped because he realized that it was not worth writing poetry, his poetry, when he goes eventually back to it, becomes full of questions. And it's heavier and even longer sometimes. It's not just I'm presenting to you this beautiful image. It's I'm presenting to you this beautiful image and I'm thinking of this and what are you thinking and we're all going to die and how do you cope with that? I'm going to read these two passages from On a Lovely Lady's image carved on her tomb. Already from the title, you see how there's this contradiction. So, you know, the aim of philosophical poetry is to live in the contradiction and to feel comfortable in it, I dare say. I'm going to read it now. This is the beginning of the poem. You were such who now are buried, dust and skeleton, placed motionless, helpless above the earth and bone. Mute gazing at the flight of ages, stands the sole guardian of grief and memory, the image of lost beauty. So he's painting the image of this woman because he sees a portrait over her tomb, and he's like, oh, you were so beautiful. And then the rest of the poem is him basically saying, oh my god, now you suck, like your body's rotten underneath the earth. Oh my god, I don't even want to think about that. Ew, gross. Okay, you're decomposing. And then he says, you know what, I'm going to ask the reader a question now that I painted this awful image. How does human nature reach so high if it is merely wretched, frail, dust and shadow? Yet if it is somehow noble, how can our finest thoughts and acts be kindred and quenched for such light, ignoble reasons? So he basically says, if we mean nothing, why do we want everything? And this is my first episode of A Room of My Own. I hope you learned something new. What did you learn today? Thank you so much. I'll see you next episode.